Well, it looks like we're getting a pretty good group, Greg. I think I'll go ahead and get us started. You got the recording going. Hello, and welcome to everyone who's joining us. Those of you just jumping on, no problem. This is our second session today for the Conversations with Colleagues series, which is being hosted by the TRB Bicycle and Pedestrian Data Subcommittee. We have an exciting session today that I hope will spur some good conversation. We have some friends here from MicroTraffic who will talk about a new open source data repository they've been developing, and hopefully we'll be able to have an opportunity to have some good conversation and feedback on both the tool and some of the applications. Real quick here. Hold on, I'm trying to, for some reason I can't, I'm trying to advance slides. There we go. Just some quick ground rules going over. A lot of you have probably participated before. If not, this is we try to keep this a very open and conversational tone. This is not necessarily a webinar type format, but with that, we'd like everybody to sort of observe some of the common Zoom etiquette. When you're not speaking, please feel free to be muted to cut down on background noise. Please avoid interrupting if possible. And if there's a lot of conversation going on, you may want to use your hand raise function, or also take advantage of using the chat box to both include references to links and ask questions. Greg Lindsay, who's also on this call with me, and I will work through that and try to make sure we facilitate and give folks good opportunities to talk. So if we just all be patient and also be prepared in case there's any glitches with technology, we always beg your patience. To get us started, I'll introduce ourselves today. First of all, I'm Tony Hall, and I'm co-host today. It says Nathan Hicks. Nathan may or may not join us. He had a quick little medical emergency today with his finger, had to go to urgent care. So instead, I also have Greg Lindsay, who's also one of the planning committee members for the Conversation with Colleagues with us. So him and I will work to help facilitate discussion. And then we have our guest presenters today. We have John Lauer and Amanda Pushka from MicroTraffic, and they're here to discuss the work they're doing with our session topic called Bicycle Right Turn Conflicts, Developing Open Source Repository of Surrogate Safety Data Using Video Analytics at 200 sites in North America. I'm not going to go into all the exciting implications of that. Just quickly, though, I'd like to give everybody who's not familiar with John and Amanda a quick overview. John Lauer is a Legal American Bicycle certified instructor, a fellow of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and past chair of the Transportation System and Operations Council at ITE. John's background is previously spent 20 years at the city of Anaheim as their traffic and transportation manager, which gave him an opportunity to oversee numerous things, including routine conduct of crash data reviews, to design and implement the most effective crash countermeasures. He also served as the person most knowledgeable in representing the city during crash litigation. In his role now in leadership in this area with MicroTraffic, he's working with a number of smart communities as VP of Safety Partnerships. Additionally, we have Amanda Pushka. Amanda is a road safety engineer and a certified road safety professional based in Winnipeg, Canada. She has complete road and safety reviews for various cities across North America, applying a safe systems approach to the identification of road user risk and recommendation of evidence-based measures to improve safety. With MicroTraffic, Amanda has helped assist more than 70 communities in leveraging near-miss data from video analytics to proactively diagnose risk and empower effective road safety improvement planning. Amanda completed her Master's of Science at the University of Manitoba in Transportation Engineering. And so I'm welcoming both of them. I think this is really exciting. And on a personal note, we spent a lot of time with this group talking about things like volume data collection and things like crash data. And we're well versed in the fact that this really doesn't help us a lot of times when we're really thinking about safety. And so it's exciting to start thinking about ways that we can look beyond volume and crash data and recorded data and start looking at behaviors and things we can observe to really get a good risk assessment. So with that, I'm going to turn over and turn my screen back, and I'm going to turn it over to Amanda and John. They're going to do a brief, about 15-minute presentation to talk about the project and the technology they're working with, and then we're going to open up for some discussion here. So feel free, if you have questions, to use the raise hand application as we go, or also use the chat box, and Greg, Lindsay, and I will address that with you. So thanks, and Amanda, John, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Amanda, if you want to just go to the session overview, the next slide. And let me start by saying it's really a privilege to be here. We've got an exciting effort just underway, and it's a good time for professionals such as the 29 we got on this call to help influence the design so that it's most useful for ongoing research. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to tee this up and talk about the method for conflict measurement, and then turn it over to Amanda, who will roll through the cyclist right hook design study, and we'll get into the majority of the time then facilitated discussion, so you guys can help us influence a product that will be useful to any researchers that we've got today. So we'll move on to the next slide. Method for conflict measurement, and what we want, go ahead to the next slide. What's new? What's new is proactive traffic analysis, where we can measure near misses and proactively and precisely diagnose risks, 5 measures of risk, to empower effective road safety improvement planning. So this is used most often to supplement the historic approach to looking back at 3 to 5 years of traffic crashes and trying to identify patterns and solve for the issues that were shown from those patterns that were in place 3 to 5 years ago. Why not collect real-time count data and have the ability to measure just how close was that, and through analysis of kinetic energy transfer, determine just how severe that near miss would have been. And then that will inform the selection of the most effective countermeasures. We can clean up those safety concerns before the crashes occur. So on to the next slide. Our process has 6 steps, starting with the collection of video at the intersection. To capture that operation, 3 days is typically what we're after. And we then input that video to our algorithms, where our artificial intelligence has been trained to identify every user of the street. We can even differentiate between bicyclists and e-scooters at a very high level of reliability. So with that, we move on to the second of our 6 steps, and that is our AI tracking. Frame by frame, we're identifying the route used by every user of the street. The third step is monocular spatial translation. I'll define that for you. It's looking at the pixels and translating the pixels from the video into ground plane measurement. And with that, we have the ability to measure precise distances and calculate precise speeds of every user of the street. With that speed and distance data, we're able to move on to step 4, is to map the trajectories of every trip made on the roadway. And that moves us into the real meat of our service. And that is step 5, identifying near misses by level of severity. We've got in the upper left, the critical near misses, critical in terms of that kinetic energy transfer. How fast were the parties going, and how close was that near miss? So we're able to look at the critical and the high risks in the upper left and apply that in our step 6, precision diagnostics, where for every movement through the intersection, we know the levels of risks of the near misses. and plot them out accordingly. With this, we're able to identify patterns and identify the most effective countermeasures to improve the safety before the crashes happen. So this slide 6 is for every movement through an intersection. For this study, we're only going to be looking at from the left to right, the first 4 to address the right hooks on every intersection approach. To the next slide. And this is my final slide before turning it over to Amanda. The measures of risk that we mentioned: temporal proximity of road users and interaction kinematics, that is transfer of energy. How severe would that crash have been if it had happened? And that is, again, our AI evaluation of speeds of the parties involved, the angles of the near miss, rates of acceleration of the parties involved, levels of vulnerability, and the order of interactions. All that goes into making roads safer for traffic that's on the roads today, and we can supplement then the crash histories of the past 3 to 5 years. Next slide is where Amanda will take over.
Okay, thanks a lot, John. So now I'd like to introduce this cyclist right hook study that we're launching using this conflict data. So just to set up the motivation for this study, projected bike lane mileage in North America has grown by more than 600% since 2011, and that's a couple of years old, that stat. So that number is going to be even larger. So it really demonstrates this demand that we're seeing for cyclist infrastructure. And especially in COVID, we've seen cyclist level increases both in Canada and the United States. And so we're really seeing the importance of developing safe and evidence-based design guidance for these facilities. Between 2014 and 2016, nearly 50% of bicyclist fatalities in urban areas were occurring at intersections. So this helps us narrow in our focus onto intersection areas. And of these facilities, right turn versus bicyclists in the same direction were listed in the top 7 most common crash types in the US. And some of the more recent data may indicate that it's even higher than that top 7, maybe in the top 3 or top 5. And so this was kind of focused us in on this right hook conflict issue. And I'll show an example of what that looks like in this video clip here. So you can see the cyclist traveling through the intersection and the vehicle making that right turn across their path. In this case here, it was a relatively low severity interaction. The cyclist proceeded through with a minimal level of risk, but these are the types of events we want to study and look at different intersection types to really try to understand the risk effects on cyclists. So regarding all this focus on intersection risk and the right hook issue, there's been a number of recent research that was published to focus on this. So first off was the NACDO Don't Give Up at the Intersection Guide in 2019, that's often referenced. And most recently, this past fall, was the NCHRP 926 Guidance to Improve Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety at Intersections. And so these guides provide a lot of great possible countermeasures to address the right hook risk conflicts, but the quantitative safety effects of these design alternatives for the right hook problem are not really well known. And so we've received a lot of feedback from agencies that are still struggling with this conflict issue and acknowledging that it's an important topic that's lacking concrete design guidance, helping them to select which treatment to use where. And so with that in mind, we started a preliminary study on this in the city of Vancouver this past winter. And we looked at 22 different locations in Vancouver. And the city was really interested in studying the frequency and severity of conflict, cyclist right hook conflicts across a variety of different site types. And a few of them are shown in that slide there. And so we looked at different unidirectional, bidirectional protected facilities. We looked at painted bike facilities. We looked at different types of signalization, whether there's a protected vehicle right turn or protected permissive, or maybe it was just permissive only. We looked at different cross-sectional geometry. So on the left-hand side image there, you can see more of a protected intersection style. And then in the middle, maybe you have to look a bit closely there, but you can see that in Canada, we can have a cycling facility to the right of a right turn lane. So we can still get this right hook conflict happening with a right turn base. So we wanted to understand some of these differences in Vancouver with their infrastructure that they had. And so we're currently still looking into that data, but just an example of some of the output that we're seeing. Oftentimes we're trying to separate cyclists and vehicles in time and space. So when we have a different type of signalization, we're temporally separating those road users as long as everyone complies to those signalizations. So on the left-hand side screen, you can see that this is a protected right turn signalization. So over 100 hours of analysis, conflict analysis, we picked up only a handful of conflicts that were happening for a protected vehicle right turn across a cycling facility. And on the right-hand side, we looked at half that period, so only 50 hours. And you can see that with a protected permissive signalization, there's already a larger frequency of conflicts that are being detected at that intersection. And these two locations had very similar amounts of daily cyclist and right turn vehicle volume. So the exposure factor was fairly similar across these two sites. So we started to see some trends in terms of the value potentially of protected right turn phasing, but we realized we wanted a larger data set and to really start to quantify these effects and the right hook cyclist risk. So this really led us to this study that we're talking about today, this right hook study. So we've expanded from those 22 locations in Vancouver to approximately 200 locations all across North America. And you can see those pins on the map there. The blue pins are participating cities and the purple pins are potential participants that are still working through some of the logistics. But in general, we've met our 200 site location goal, and always happy to include if anyone else wants to join in. But from this, we've expanded to the potential to collect at 200 sites. We've established a technical steering committee to really help guide this study. It's made up of a lot of different practitioners in cities and DOTs, research collaborators. I see Krista's on the call here. Always happy to have you involved, Krista. And developed this technical steering committee to really help us shape into something that does become a best practice design guideline that can be used across North America. And so currently we're finalizing our site type matrix to address the key items that would be improved with quantitative near miss data. So we're hoping to hear some feedback today about some of the challenges that are faced by practitioners when designing for right hook cyclist infrastructure. So that's our next step. And then upcoming in the next few months, we'll be collecting 3 to 7 days of video footage at each location and then running conflict analysis as John presented there through our video diagnostic software. And this will be happening this summer here. And so upcoming into the next year to do work on our other outputs. So to provide a quick overview of our study site type matrix, on the left-hand side, we want to look at a few different cycling facility types. So you can see that there's a protected one-way bike lane, a protected two-way bike lane, painted bike lanes, unprotected, and multi-use paths. We want to look at different types of lane designation. So is there added risk by having a right turn lane, a right turn bay right next to a cycling facility, or is that okay? We know that there's MUTCD restrictions in the States for this, but curious to see what the data is actually saying about that. And we want to look at different signalization types. So whether that's a leading bike interval, does that help reduce risk or reduce the severity of that potential interaction? Looking at protected only right turn vehicle signalization. So starting to understand some of these differences in site types. And in addition to this matrix, we're going to be collecting a large amount of attribute data at each location. And this will help us to gain additional insights about the impacts of various design components, such as the lateral offset, whether right turn on red was restricted or not, if the type of protection that's there, so what kind of buffer are we seeing? Is it just a curb or a flexible delineator post? The approach grade for the cyclist. So a lot of different intricacies that we want to try to massage out by looking at data. So this attribute data will be collected as we move through this study. And so some of the expected outcomes of this work is first and foremost, we really just want to increase the knowledge of road safety issues that are related to cyclist safety in North America, especially for this right hook configuration that is so prominent in our bikeless fatalities in the past decade. So the key is just to gain that data that is lacking and allow us to improve our understanding of the issues. In addition, we'd like to create this open source repository of cyclist right hook conflict data. So at those 200 locations, we're going to provide conflict data. We're going to look at the cyclist volumes, the right turn vehicle volumes, right turn vehicle speeds, and the different site attributes, and try to look at different factors that are valuable to examine there. And this open source database can then be leveraged by practitioners, researchers, and other people who are looking into right hook risk. So this could be a potential input data for future studies into connected vehicle standards development, or a bicyclist systemic safety analysis, crash conflict modeling, etc. And the final outcome of the work will be to develop a quantitative best practice design guideline to improve cyclist safety at intersections. So the outcome will be to allow practitioners a guide that helps them to select which treatment to use where. And so in collaboration with our technical steering committee, research partners, industry professionals, local designers and planners and engineers, we really are excited about the outcomes of this work. So just to highlight some study sponsors that have, or industry sponsors that have contributed to this work. And I'd like to move into the facilitated discussion here. So I've prepared some questions here. Tony, I'm not sure how you want to move through them. We can just maybe go one at a time and see how that works. But if you're really itching to answer, one of those particular items, we could jump to that too. And I think there's a question box there if you don't want to speak up yourself, but we'd still love to hear from you, your input. Yeah, Tony, thoughts on how you want to structure this?
Well, first of all, thank you. I think this is really exciting work, and I'm really excited about sort of the long-term implications of this. I'm going to go ahead and invite folks, if it doesn't interfere with your reception, to go ahead and turn your cameras on. Yeah, we can work with these questions. I'd like to open up though, if there's any folks who have some immediate questions for John or Amanda, or comments, to go ahead and offer those up now. You can either just unmute yourself and jump in, or if you would like, also use the hand raise function, and Greg or I will call on you. So is there anybody in the audience here who has some questions for Amanda or John?
I'm going to jump in. I'm Jim Barros, I'm the league cycling instructor coach. We teach people how to avoid right hook conflicts by offering them the opportunity and the idea of changing their lane positioning, even leaving the bike lane or even a protected bike lane, which is legal in California anyway, to avoid or at least mitigate the crash. I should start with, this is very exciting and wonderful. Congratulations, please continue. This is wonderful. But are you collecting data about the lane position choice of the bicyclists as they approach the intersection? Obviously, or at least obviously to me, if the bicyclist moves to the left into the flow of straight through traffic, they're less likely to be hooked. So is that something that's going to be collected? And if not, please do.
Do you want to take that, John, or should I jump in here?
I'll take the first crack at it. It's a very interesting point, Jim, and maybe that's something we can take a look at to flag where within the lane was the bicyclist. All of our efforts are to inform the best design of the facility, of the intersection. So Amanda, your thoughts?
Yeah, similar to what you were saying there, John. So we're going to have the attribute data of where that bike lane is placed relative to that adjacent travel lane, so that lateral offset between the two. Within the bike lane and where that cyclist is, we do have trajectory information. So that's something that we could potentially look at down the line. But yeah, like John said, we're trying to guide the design of the infrastructure. And if we can control a little bit of that lateral offset, and we may not be able to exactly output the exact location in the bike lane per conflict, because we'll have hundreds of locations and hundreds of conflicts. But that's a really good point, and something we'll keep in mind as we're moving forward here.
Thank you very much. It's important for our continuing instruction and guidance for people about how to avoid the problem.
Great.
In spite of the infrastructure.
I think there's another good point there to address, in that this type of analysis is looking at the potential for conflicts. So it's really looking at proximity, speed, trajectory, and potential conflict. And it does occur to me that there are a number of times that we could identify conflicts where neither user is actually doing something which would be construed as illegal. And I think that's even more important to what Jim's saying. If we can identify where illegal behaviors actually aren't creating the safest environments, particularly with right turn hooks, I think a lot of times it's no bad intention, but there are bad potential.
Yeah, good point, Tony.
And I'm going to put Krista on the spot. Since you're involved with this, Krista, would you like to make some remarks about your role in the project and what you've been doing?
Well, can we go back to the slide, Amanda, with the matrix you had there? Because I think that gets to some of the answers there. So we have unprotected one-directional bike lane, protected bi-directional bike lane, and painted bike lane unprotected. So this one, the painted bike lane unprotected, would be one where it might be possible for the cyclist to get into the main lane to avoid the conflict. So there we can actually study what Jim was referring to. In some of the other situations, it would be more challenging for the cyclists to do that. Anyway, so I just wanted to point out that we're looking at the, as Amanda already said, we're looking at all these different types of infrastructure to answer the question. In terms of my role, I'm just an advisor, and my interest mainly is in making sure that the data are valid and provided to the community. So that was my question, since I've got the floor, is more in terms of, especially in terms of the subcommittee, what data will be made available and to researchers, and how will it be made available?
Yeah, good question. So we're trying to organize out the logistics of that, but right now the plan is to have all the conflict data made available. So the conflict and their severity rating, so the associated speed and temporal separation. We'd like to make available the volume counts we get over a 24-hour period in 15-minute bins, and all the attribute data for each site location. So that will have each jurisdiction provide for that particular location. So that whole database, speed, volume, conflict, attributes should be all made publicly available, and we're probably going to use that on a website so that people can just download that that database file.
I have more questions, but I want to make sure everyone else gets a chance. Thank you, Amanda.
No problem. I think maybe you're muted there, Tony. Can't.
Thank you. As I was just sort of mumbling, I was going to prod some of our public agency or DOT folks to sort of ask what currently type of things they're doing to do risk assessments or look at things where again, we're not waiting to get the devastating crash data, but we understand maybe a complex intersection or a place where we've had some reports of problems. What other ways are folks quantifying these problems to be able to address safety issues currently? And it's okay if maybe, we're not, it's not, I don't think it's an easy, straightforward thing. I think there's some intuitive ways to do intersection audits to try to address key issues. But again, I think being able to use a tool that lets us see actually how behaviors work. I'm also very interested, I think, in when we talk about the attributes, that seems like a very straightforward thing, but I think that's some of the details that are critical. I think one of the problems is, almost no two intersections are the same. And so when we develop a metric that fits a type of intersection, we also need to be prepared to refine that to the modest details or even behavioral norms that would happen at another intersection. And is there, how do, I guess, from the team's perspective, do you anticipate being able to sort of expand the application to address some of those more fine details?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And that was what we found with the Vancouver data. We're like, this is really exciting, but we only have one intersection comparison that's happening here. And that's when we tried to expand to those 200 different sites. Something that we used to have in an initial version of this matrix here was, lateral offset. But then we realized that, well, if it's a protected intersection, it might be 5 meters. Vancouver's done some modifications where they just only had 3 meters to fit in there. Does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meters of offset really make a difference? And the same with an advanced stop line. What amount is there differences in there depending on the site type. So we're really hoping to be careful about our site selection as we fill up this matrix so that we can potentially tease out some of those details that maybe a lateral offset of 2 or 3 meters, we often deal with restricted cross sections in cities, is sufficient to like expanding that sight line for that vehicle cyclist interaction. So yeah, it's definitely difficult because every site is different, but with this database, we're hoping to have at least a pretty strong understanding of the differences between each site and hoping to tease out some statistically significant findings. John, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, the volume data, in addition to the design type of the intersection, we'll be able to identify not only number of interactions, but number of bicyclists going through the intersection and number of right turn vehicles.
Well, I guess I'll take the liberty of asking additional questions until folks feel comfortable. But I'm also curious because this project itself is purposefully narrow and specific to dealing with a specific issue around right turns and bike conflicts, which is important. Is there plans to sort of adopt, I think, this level of study to other issues, and particularly I'm thinking in the world of pedestrians. There's a number of very specific intersection related issues that may be captured but not focused on in this study. And is there a way to start to replicate or expand this analysis to other, I guess, crash typologies?
Yeah, we would love to. We've had a lot of people asking, how are you doing left hooks too? And what about this type? What about that type? And we'd love to keep doing that sort of work because we think this is really valuable for the industry and providing this data that's just lacking for researchers. So we would love to expand it to pedestrians, to left hook, to other configurations in the future if we can. But yeah, for this, we tried to narrow the scope just to the right hook study. And I think there's an NCHRP project ongoing right now with some focus on left and right hook issues at intersections.
And we're getting some questions. We have Joan Hudson who's asking, in Austin, we have seen crashes involving right turning motorists and bicyclists coming to the right at a right angle using a sidewalk and riding against traffic. Does the software, the application, have a way to measure these types of near misses? And is that included in the study?
Yeah, sir, can you repeat the conflict type again? You said right angle?
Yeah, it's bicyclists coming from the right at a right angle using a sidewalk and riding against traffic. Yeah, so those types of conflicts we do measure when we do a more standard intersection analysis, but for this study, we are trying to just focus on a vehicle turning right and that kind of side impact there, not any of the dash out kind of near side conflict type that I think is being requested there. But we typically could do that, but as not part of this study.
Well, it would be part of the study if it occurs within the crosswalk. You've got a bicyclist on a sidewalk riding against traffic, but if that sidewalk puts them into the intersection crosswalk, we definitely would pick them up, and that would be one of the conflicts which we would be assessing. Yeah, if they're parallel to the vehicle traveling, whether it's in the contraflow or in the same flow, but if they're perpendicular, yeah, we won't.
Excellent. And then Charlene Mingus is asking if there's a list of the cities or jurisdictions participating, which I think there is in the study, and if maybe you could provide that to the group.
Yeah, we can provide that. We can provide the ones that have been for sure committed, and then the potential ones as they sort out their logistics. But yeah, we can certainly provide that. Is it best to provide in, I don't know, how do you send out information afterwards, or?
If you can, well, you can add, if there's links, you can add links in the chat box now, or collect. We'll send a follow-up after to participants. So both work.
Sure. Yeah, we can. I don't have a link right now to a list of cities, but I can provide that in the afterwards.
That's great.
Chris Monsieur has a question also. It says, are you planning to count or characterize pedestrian activity in these intersections where you'll be studying the right hook turns?
For this study, we're just going to be focusing on the cyclists. So in the future, we like to look at pedestrians, but yeah, I'm trying to keep it a little bit scope specific for this one. But the data will be there. Sorry.
We have had that same request to look at pedestrians from a couple other agencies, and we're open to discussion of that, but that is going to require more staff time, more computer time, more budget would be necessary for that. If I can just transition back to the last conversation, the confirmed cities participating in the study are listed in the invite to this meeting, but we'll supplement that with all of those that are confirmed and those that are nearly confirmed.
I just want to mention that there might be something Chris is getting at there with the pedestrian activity, since it may be interacting with the bicyclist movement. So there's probably something we need to learn about pedestrian crossing in addition to bicyclist right turn that may be impacting the severity of the conflicts. So even though it's, I know you want to limit the scope, it is an important factor in the right hook crash.
Yeah, okay, good point there. The nice thing about this is that we'll have the video. So the video collection is a big component of it, and it can be analyzed, and we can output extra data in the future if we need to.
And that gets me to my next question, which is, will researchers be able to access that video for the purposes of, validating the counts provided, validating the severities, just validating the data provided?
Yes, we'd like to provide access to the clips, but that's going to be, it depends on our privacy requirements with the particular cities we're working in. Some cities are open to sharing that data. Other ones have some apprehension. So hopefully we can provide at least the clips for all those conflicts, just to help. We love to get our risk data validated as well. So that would be a little bonus for us too. But yeah, that's to be determined.
And will you, so the other question is, we've noticed sometimes with the video analytics and AI that not all conflicts may be identified, not all bicyclists may be identified. So there's a need to check that. So that requires looking at the entire video to find those events that may not be recorded by the AI. Is that something you're doing in-house or somebody's going to do?
We do a lot of quality control checks like that in-house as we produce our reporting. So yeah, quite a few quality control and assurance checks. But if the full video is of interest, we could potentially ask to see if that's something that could be released as well.
And then we have another question in the chat box from Corey Berger. And it says, will you be characterizing incidents by what is happening with other users, i.e. vehicles also turning left, people walking in crosswalks, etc.?
Yeah, so I think we've touched on that briefly. We would really like to look at all the different interactions and what's going on with left turning vehicles, for example, because that is a big concern. But this study will primarily focus on cyclists and that right turning vehicle. But again, like we said, we're going to have clips for those interactions, so we'll be able to look at that when we're developing guidelines and see if there's certain trends with, okay, this is happening because there's a lot of interaction with pedestrians, for example. So while it won't be directly output in the data, it is going to be looked at when we're developing our guidelines.
And I have sort of a two-part question about sort of the outcome of the study. First of all, when we expect to complete the study, but then also as a product of the study, once this analysis is done, is this going to have a comparative element that then sort of says, okay, this context for certain treatments are actually working at intersections, whereas not, to basically sort of update some of our design guidance? Yeah, so we're hoping to, like I said, have all the video collected by this fall and start to analyze that. And that the study is, we're hoping to get some sort of guideline draft within the year, but that could extend depending on a couple other external circumstances that are surrounding the project. But yeah, the idea would be to try to look at contextual factors that influence the effectiveness of various treatments. So for example, is protected signalization really the ultimate type of treatment where you're completely separating those road users temporally if they are abiding by that signalization? So we want to look at the volume and exposure data so that we can help agencies look at their infrastructure and their location and say, okay, look, based on data,
this particular treatment may be most effective in my particular location. So yeah, the idea would be to develop contextual factors that can really help us. And we were starting to see some of those trends teased out in Vancouver with just looking at the daily cross product value and some of the initial studies or statistical findings we were looking at.
Now,
We
Christina
have a-
asking, will you include locations with mixing zones in your sites?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had originally included that in our matrix. There was and we sent that out to a number of agencies to provide feedback and interest on what site types were of most interest. Right now, mixing zones aren't included in this matrix here, but that's something that we could consider if there is quite a lot of interest in that.
There's another question from Jim. He asked if, he writes, it occurs to me that intersections with separate traffic signal phases for bike versus motorists exist to reduce right hands conflicts. Is this a variable to be included?
Yeah, so I think that question is referring to including, the protected only concept of signalization. So where you're temporally separating those different road users. And in that case, the conflict will only result if one of the road users doesn't comply with that. So we do want to take a look at that as well.
If I could expand on that, we're also interested in finding agencies that are installing roadside units, getting ready for connected automated vehicles, and explore those interactions as well.
I'm skipping forward here, Tony, because I was a little bit interested in hearing back from some of the agencies on the call about some of the challenges and successes of the right hook risk, of dealing with right hook risks. So have you found that, say, for example, protected intersections are working really well in your local agency? Just curious if there's any thoughts on challenges and successes with cyclist right hook risk.
Yeah, sure. Open that up to anybody who maybe has an anecdote or an instance to share with a local experience. Realizing, of course, we don't have a great deal of truly protected intersections.
Yeah, protected intersections or even some sort of different phasing, maybe leading bike interval or bike signals or anything in particular that you've found.
Well, while we keep that question open, Jim's asked another question in terms of what's involved or required for an agency such as the City of San Diego to have some intersections included in this study. How do they become participants?
Yeah, great question. We'd love to add you to the list. There is a contribution. It's a pooled fund study. So we have some sponsorship, there's some city participation, and there's video collection. So the video collection would have to be added from those locations, as well as the video analytics that we do has to be funded as well. So we'd love to connect with you and talk about those options. I'll just flip to this next slide here. There's an email for John and I. If you want to send us an email, we'd be happy to connect and chat. The more sites, the better in our mind for this study. John, do you have anything you want to add to that?
San Diego showed some initial interest, but at the end advised that they weren't ready to proceed at this time. So Jim, if you wanted to help revisit that with staff, that'd be wonderful. I see a question pop up, Vancouver. Is that the BC or the Washington? It is BC.
And I guess that's one question I'll throw out also. Given that obviously it's Canadian researchers, the majority in the initial cities are Canadian, are you anticipating a broad set of differences in terms of what you find with US intersections as opposed to Canadian intersections, and how do you plan to sort of maybe differentiate those?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess the first thing is that we're able to have a right turn bay adjacent to a right lane bicycle lane where they can turn across, where I don't think the MUTCD allows you guys to do that down in the States here. So we are looking at those differences. In terms of other controlling factors, throughout that matrix, we want to try to spread out the site types among various cities so that there aren't any sort of geographic influences on that data. But that will be an interesting thing to control for the US versus Canada. And if there are differences, we're going to start to look at the different attributes as we get that data back. So that would be an interesting thing to look at as well. Who's safer, US or Canada?
Well, and certainly that's, I think, something to look at. It if you're finding a difference in safety in both, I think it's to revisit that maybe, you know, one or the other of us are not doing exactly the right thing. And so it's the way to revisit. Mike Salaberry is on the line, but has poor audio. So he's writing this out. Mike says, we found compliance at signalized separated intersections to be far from ideal, yet the overall safety and perception of comfort results show that they work better than mixing zones. Seems that much of the compliance issues happen when people deem it safe to go against the signal. For example, no cyclists or right turning drivers in sight.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. I guess in that case, then we would see low conflict data, even if the video was showing a higher number of counts.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and there's more here for Mike. Continuing on that, our first protected intersection is actually at a two-way intersection, has been in for a few years now in San Francisco. So far, it looks like there have been fewer severe injury crashes, but more crashes overall. Higher ridership may account for some of the increase, so more analysis is needed. Again, I think that makes sense. Thanks, Mike.
And you said Mike's from San Francisco?
Yes, yes.
Well,
And
we should add it to our analysis
wait,
site
stop.
there. We're doing some sites in San Francisco.
Although I assume Mike's still in, he didn't say so, but I assume he's still in San Francisco. Tell anybody.
And Corey Berger has a follow-up question to Mike's. He says, it would be good to look at time since installation as we found more issues in Victoria earlier. So that might be a variable that could be collected for the various intersections. Time sense, time operational.
Okay, like the temporal distribution of when the conflicts are happening during the day. Is that my understanding
Well,
correct?
I think, or more since the site was built as is, and look at, see if there's rates. Of course, cross-sectional analysis, that'd be hard, but I think they were getting at the time that the signals have been in particular design has been implemented at a site. There's a temporal change in rates of change. I think that's what the last two comments were getting at.
I think that's a very good point and would relate not only to signals, but any change to the striping or modification of the bicycle facilities there.
Yeah, so an interesting extension of this study is when we take our 3 to 7 days of conflict data, we're going to have, as part of the attribute data, images of the approach conditions, of the attributes at the time of conflict collection, so we know what was there. But it would be interesting to do a follow-up study based on, okay, here's what the findings are saying are the best practice design guidelines. Let's implement that and look at it again and see what kind of reduction in risk we're seeing, and are there residual risks that weren't addressed in terms of right hooks. So that would be really interesting extension of this work.
Yeah, always great to be able to actually find the proof in the pudding, so to speak.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm just scanning to see if anybody else has some other questions. We're 10 minutes away from the hour, so I want to make sure if there's anybody who has something they want to get in before we have to wrap up.
I have another question if you have time.
Sure.
Sure.
I'm just wondering why 3 to 7, I think you said 3 to 7 days is the time for collection of the video. Why was that chosen? I'm just getting nervous that we won't have enough interactions to make any conclusive studies. This has been a problem in other research.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of our work, we're doing full intersection studies. That's kind of the time frame that we use is 3 to 7 days, and we oftentimes get enough conflict data at those locations. We are trying to target locations that have a higher kind of cross product, which I think earlier you mentioned it'd be really nice to look at, unprotected signalized locations as a base case, but we might not have as many cyclist volumes and interactions at those locations. So we are trying to target a minimum of 10 conflicts per location, just so we start to get an adequate level. But in terms of video collection, resource, and analysis time, a lot of, from the practical side of things, the Mile Vision Scouts can only record up to, 60 hours on high definition. So we're just trying to balance the different constraints that agencies have to face when they're collecting that video footage. But in the past and in our experience doing video analytics, the 3 to 7 days have been generally a good ballpark for us to get some adequate conflict data to start to expose those trends.
Thank you.
Actually, let me just check the checkbox. Greg, if I missed any questions, I'm now scrolling the chat box.
I think, Tony, we've got those.
Okay.
We've got all the questions, comments that we've received thus far. Oh, there's a raised hand. Charlene, you want to go ahead and share?
Yeah, so I'm the active transportation planner in Baltimore Metropolitan Council. So I'm just going to propose, let our jurisdictions know about this because I'm not sure it's on their radar. If someone was interested in joining, what would be the kind of hard deadline for you all?
Yeah, so we're hoping to get video collection in this season. So because we have so many Canadian partners, we're trying to get that done by September. I don't know what exactly it's like in Baltimore, but if you could we could work through the process and arrange for video collection to be happening by September, October time, then we would still be able to analyze that and include that in our full database. So, the sooner the better. If we should connect offline, feel free to send me an email and we can set up a call if that is something of interest. But yeah, I think the key component would be to get video collection in the next several months here.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Chris Monsieur is sharing another thought. He says another aspect with right hook crashes with respect to signal operations is when during the green phase the conflict occurs. That is, the LBI should help early, but maybe no different later if not all bicycles are served during the LBI.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's something that we're interested in as well, is try to know the connection between the conflict versus what the signal phasing is at that time. It can be difficult to get that data, especially if we can't see the signal head in the video footage. So that data is a little bit harder to output, but ideally we can get the signal phase in the video and we can to look at that as well. But yeah, thanks for that point. Yes, as we're kind of getting close to the end here, I'd be curious about topic 4. If anyone has thoughts either in the question box or wants to chime in, are there any parameters that you haven't heard mentioned today that you would really like this right hook study to investigate? Are there areas where the design guides that you're referencing aren't meeting what you need in your local area? Curious if there's any thoughts on that.
Actually, one
Feel free
question.
to, oh yeah, go ahead.
One question that came up in a study done here in the cities recently is whether or not, I don't know, do the stops have, any of them have bus stops or transit and interactions near the intersection that could affect the operations?
Yeah,
this is something that transit operators here in the Twin Cities were quite concerned about, and how they can interact with where you put, say, a protected bike lane when there's a transit stop just before the signal.
Yeah, that's a great point. John, we should add transit to our list of attributes there. I don't know if that's currently on there right now, but that would be a really interesting thing to look at. I know we've had discussions in the past, the whole near side, far side discussion, but that's certainly interesting. Thank you.
That could almost be an additional study because of details, but
yeah,
it's 26 after the hour, so I'm going to start wrapping this up. And first of all, I really want to thank Amanda and John for sharing. I think this is a really exciting project. I hope that as this gets toward the end, maybe we revisit this conversation. I think everybody's going to want to sort of hear some of these outcomes and understand, how this might be useful in their cities. Just some housekeeping. I want to remind everybody, we're in the process right now of finalizing our August conversation with colleagues, and we'll be featuring the City of New Orleans led bicycle pedestrian safety tool. So again, staying on this safety theme conversation, we'll have Tara Tolford, who's the research associate at the University of New Orleans Transportation Institute, and Dan Jardis from the Mayor's Office of Transportation in New Orleans. And this is also an exciting project that they're just getting some beta things. So they're really excited to be able to present and actually get some feedback from our audience. So watch for an email with more of a description of that project and the dates. I will tell you, we're nailing it down. It'll probably be the last week of August. We try to keep these stretched out so they're not too close together. And that said, for those on the line, if you have some ideas of topics or things that you're working on that you think you'd like to share with this group, contact me or contact Nathan Hicks and let us know about it. We try to do 4 or so of these a year, but it's really also about the demand for doing this. And so I just want to thank everybody who's participating today, and thanks on behalf of the Bike and Pedestrian Data Subcommittee. So any final remarks from our panel?
No, just thank you so much for your feedback, and we look forward to launching this study. It's something we're really excited about. And feel free to send an email if you have any other thoughts in the next couple of days.
Yeah, I too want to thank the group. We picked up some really good ideas. I think the next step for us will be to put that into our meeting with the committee to start getting some guidance on how to proceed with these great ideas. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you in August. Oh, I figured out. You have to stop sharing your screen to leave the meeting. Hey, Greg, give me a call soon when you're back in town. We got to connect now that hopefully we're both vaccinated.